Hello, everyone. On behalf of Graduate Student Legal Aid, welcome to the GRadulting Workshop Series. My name is Debbie McCutsky, and I am the Coordinator of Services and Programs for Graduate Student Legal Aid. Today's workshop is brought to you by Graduate Student Legal Aid and Undergraduate Student Legal Aid. And we will answer the burning question, how do I avoid accidental plagiarism? So let's get started with a few announcements. The GRadulting Workshop Series takes place on Tuesdays at 12:30. And if you missed any of our previous workshops, you can find links to the recordings on our website, which is gradlegalaid.umd.edu. And in the past several weeks, we've addressed topics including how to manage student loan debt, how to get a Maryland driver's license, and we also got an update on U.S. immigration policies. Looking ahead to next Tuesday's workshop, the question we will answer is, how do I buy a car and take care of it? You'll find the registration link on TerpLink. It's on our website. It will be in our e-newsletter, and we'll also post that in the chat. So in addition to these workshops, the legal aid offices provide free legal services to UMD students. And I am not sure if both attorneys are here with us today, but I'll let you know who they are. First up is Cindy Schilling. Cindy, say hi if you have a second. She is the director for the undergrad legal aid office. And Zach Mundy is the director for graduate legal aid. And Cindy and Zach over the years have helped countless students with a variety of legal issues, tenant-landlord disputes, traffic citations, and much, much more. To schedule an appointment with them, please visit legalaid.umd.edu. And I'm hearing, is someone talking or does someone have a question? Okay, please mute your microphone, okay? Great. So I want to lay the groundwork for the workshop today. First of all, you don't need to take a lot of notes because we will share the PowerPoint presentation after the workshop. Feel free to post your questions in the chat. And finally, near the end of the workshop, we will post a link to a 6-second survey. And literally, I mean it, it will take you 6 seconds. So please, please fill it out. We really want your feedback so we can maintain the highest quality workshops possible. So let's get started with today's workshop on the topic of accidental plagiarism. We are fortunate to have two highly qualified speakers with us today. First, a warm welcome to Dr. Linda McCree. Hi, Linda. Dr. McCree is the Director of Academic and Professional Development in the Graduate School, and she has directed the Graduate School Writing Center since 2014. Prior to that, she served as the Director of the Academic Writing Program in the English Department for about 8 years. And for many years, Dr. McCree has generously shared her time with Grad Legal Aid as a workshop presenter. So thank you, Dr. McCree. Next, I'm pleased to present Tara Johnston. Tara is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Teaching and Learning, Policy and Leadership in the College of Education. She currently serves on staff as an advocate at Graduate Student Legal Aid. And for over 2 years, she has worked with her fellow grad students who have been charged by the university with a code violation. So thank you, Tara, for your great work at Legal Aid. So Tara, I'm going to call on you first. I know that as an advocate, you've learned a lot about plagiarism and cheating from students who have been charged. So I'd like you to share your insights and just tell us about advocacy services at Legal Aid.
Great, thanks Debbie. So as Debbie said, my name's Tara. I'm also a student here at UMD, and I'm so happy to see so many people on this workshop today. It's a really important topic, so I'm just really glad that so many people are taking advantage of this free resource that's available to you as students. You know, based on my experience as a student advocate at Grad Legal Aid in the last 2 years, I would say almost all of the students that I help, when they are charged with plagiarism and cheating, that their violations are almost always an accident, okay? So I think that this provides us with important context for what Dr. McCree is going to talk to us about. This is one of those things that I think most people think this is something that would never happen to me. I would never encounter a situation like this. People are most of the time completely blindsided when they're charged with a violation, and they have no idea, you know, how serious the consequences are going to be until it's too late. And then they try to go back and learn those skills to avoid plagiarism in the future. But if you can learn those skills now, then you will never have to end up in that situation. You'll never put yourself at risk of ending up in that situation. Things like not knowing proper citation systems, you know, not knowing how to paraphrase, not knowing what the expectations are, or not communicating with their professors about certain things. You know, all of this has led to people being charged with plagiarism. Now, I know we have some grad students, some undergrad students, and the consequences are serious for both. For graduate students, the expectations are definitely higher, where you could be, you know, you could be facing suspension just for a first-time charge of plagiarism or cheating, even if it is on accident, right? The way that our code of academic integrity is written is that it doesn't matter what your intentions were. You know, you're a grad student, you should kind of know what the expectations are. And a lot of people don't know that, you know, which is really hard to watch as I'm trying to advocate for these students who are going through something so stressful that could have been avoided. So I really hope that you take to heart the things that Dr. McCree has to say today, knowing what I've told you today, so that you never have to be one of those students who comes into our office so distraught because they have accidentally made this huge mistake that could impact them for a very long time, academically and otherwise. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McCree, and I'm excited to hear all the information she's going to share with us today.
Great, thank you, Tara. So I have slides to illustrate what I'm doing. So let me get those started. They're at the end instead of the beginning. That's not good. Sorry. Okay. There we go. All right. Okay. So thank you, Tara and Debbie, for the introduction and the invitation to come and talk. So I appreciate what Tara was saying to set this up, and I'll reiterate that really from the university's perspective, there really is kind of no accident here, right? Sometimes students will talk about unintentional plagiarism, but again, the stakes for graduate students are pretty high. The expectation is that you understand that using sources is typical in academic discourse at this level, and that you know how to do it well. There's all sorts of resources for this. I think I have, let me see if I can put in the chat Some of the, we have a website specifically, the Writing Center, that has some of the same information. I did a video for orientation. So if you're a new graduate student, you probably saw a video shorter than this, but still pretty long and significant, kind of focusing on how to use sources effectively and accurately. And so I'm happy to answer questions about anything. As we're going along, please feel free to put questions in the chat, and I'll say that, I don't know if Tara or Debbie, you're monitoring the chat, but if questions are about, I can't really see the chat while I'm presenting. So if they are, questions are about something that I'm just talking about, please feel free to just turn on mics and say them. Otherwise, I'll answer questions.
Okay, we're on board with that, Linda. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. So get started. So academic integrity at Maryland. I'm just going to jump through a few things, and actually the first few slides are exactly the same information that is on the link that I just put that's on our website. So what is academic integrity? Just so that we're all on the same page. As a graduate student, you've joined an academic community. The pursuit of knowledge is our fundamental goal. And in this community, an essential value is a commitment to honesty in that academic work. So so that's what academic integrity is, representing the academic work that you do with integrity and honesty. Maryland has a code of academic integrity that reminds all members of the community that cheating, fabrication, facilitating academic dishonesty, plagiarism, and self-plagiarism are all acts of academic dishonesty. The code is administered by the Office of Student Conduct. So we're going to focus on plagiarism and a little bit about self-plagiarism today, but those other things are also part of the code of academic integrity. So what is plagiarism? Plagiarism is presenting the words or the ideas of others from articles, from websites, from classmates as your own work. And really the way that this happens is that you fail to cite or to give some kind of acknowledgement to the source of information or the specific words in a written exercise. How do you avoid it? The short answer is that you always provide a citation for any words, any ideas, any images, data, etc. that you've used from a source in your assignments or projects or papers. If the idea or the word that you use didn't come from you, it needs a citation. And I've said that I've cut this right out of the guide, so it's a see the reverse for more information, but we'll just talk through that more information. So some tips to prevent plagiarism: start your assignments early. Tara would probably confirm this, that a lot of times when I talk to students who have been accused of plagiarism, often what they've done is waited too long, and so they are just kind of grabbing sources from anywhere, not really keeping track of what they've done. And that's one easy way to fall into the trap of unintentional plagiarism. Always check with your instructor about what the expectations for a citation style are. Like, there are different styles. Ask your advisor what style they want you to use. I think one of the best kind of things to keep in mind is never just cut. It's so easy to do on a paper, cut on a computer, cut and paste a source into your paper. If you're doing that into your notes, you see a great phrase on a website, or you're reading in a PDF and you cut it and put it in a note file, that's fine. But never ever let that get into your paper. That's the easiest way to be to not be careful about your citation. And then when in doubt, ask for help. So the Writing Center is certainly available to help with help you figuring out things about citation. Also, your professors in your class should be able to help you if you don't fully understand what their expectation is. But obviously, we're going to talk about how to prevent that too. The presentation's not over. So proper citation is really the key to everything. Making sure that you are giving credit to the work that you've used, the ideas or the words of others. So a citation is a signal. When you're reading something, a citation is a signal to your reader that the information that you are sharing came from somewhere else. So in academic writing, we're always building on the ideas of others. That's the expectation. That's the norm at this level of academic writing. So a citation really is a way to let your reader know what you're building on, and to really clearly distinguish. Here's what someone else has said, someone else's ideas, and here are my ideas. So, and citation should include both a note in the body of your paper and a reference at the end. And I have an example. This one happens to be APA style, which is largely used in social sciences, often in education. So a citation involves both an in-text reference and a reference at the end, your bibliography, your reference list, whatever it's called. And so here's what your text may look like, right? And the in-text citation, again, this is APA style, like there's one right there. There's others, obviously, but then I only pulled out one. This also, here's what it looks like in text. You've given the APA style author's name and the year, and then on your reference list at the end, you give the full information about the article, right? So both of those are necessary in a citation. I've often seen students have only a reference list at the end and not do in-text citations and think that they are fine, that they have not plagiarized, but then they have made all sorts of references in their text to work, where your ideas came from, which ones are yours, and which ones belong to your references, then that is still plagiarizing. So 2 parts in a citation. And then here's another example. This is in IEEE style, so in engineering. So all the little numbers here, if you see this, you don't really have to read it. You can kind of see them standing out. These are in-text citations. There's lots of them here. I had a student tell me once, I thought that was just numbering the sentences. So I point that out because if you're new to this level of academic work or to this style and not knowing what that is, but all of those you can see are, if I take away the circles, you can see they are ideas there that are being referenced, and everyone has a citation. And in this case, I didn't give you the reference at the end too. If this were, this is obviously hot linked, and if we hovered over it, we'd see the citation if it were hot linked and not in my presentation. So why do we do all of that? I think the why is actually really important information to think about. So in the American education system, writers are just expected, this is an expected value, we're expected to acknowledge with a citation the ideas and the words of others. And a citation really demonstrates to whoever's reading your work, your professors, later on editors, your dissertation committee, a citation demonstrates that you've done your research and also shows where you did that research. So it gives credit to your sources, but also credibility to your work, right? So it's saying, I've read these important sources and I know how to use them. I'm building on them to create my own work. So it's not just about giving credit, but also creating a sense of credibility for your own work. And then I mentioned there's different citation styles. And this is a good, if you don't know which citation style you should be using in your class, that's an essential question to be asking your advisor. Different styles do things slightly differently, but they all have an in-text citation and a reference, and they're all kind of doing the same thing, giving some indication in the text of a connection to the reference list at the end. So there's a few common ones, and I have some examples in other slides about these different styles. And I'm happy to try and answer questions about those as well. And so again, when do you include a citation? And I'll say this a few times in a few different ways throughout the presentation. You need a citation every time you refer to the ideas of someone else in your text. That might be an idea you learned from a source, when you summarize things that you've read elsewhere, when you directly quote the words from a source. So, and again, a citation is both the note in the body and the reference at the end. So lots of students say, well, if I have a source and I just kind of move around the words, that's fine, right? I'm not using the author's original words. So if I just move around the words, that's fine, but that's not okay. It's not okay to just change around a few words of someone else's text. So first of all, because in academic writing at this level, you want to be citing ideas. You want your readers to know, where did that idea come from, right? So even if you haven't used the exact words of a source, you still want to be giving credit to an idea and kind of showing where your thinking came from. And you want to put those ideas into your own words as best as possible, or quote directly. And I'll say something more about that. So in lots of disciplines, quoting directly is very atypical. So I'll show you some examples when it is, but often, especially in STEM fields, particularly in engineering, it's very rare that you see a direct quotation. And again, kind of putting things in your own words is not just rearranging and changing a few words around. So we'll look at some examples. So again, why do we care about plagiarism? I think this is an important thing to remember in the context of an American university. Plagiarism is a distinctly American concern. And when I bring up that article from Vox, perhaps many of you remember this incident of the current First Lady being accused of taking parts of her speech from the previous First Lady's speech. But the article, more than the salacious picture that goes with it, really did a nice job of explaining why plagiarism is a distinctly American concern and a very modern concern. Here's a quote from this article. The concept of plagiarism as we understand it didn't exist in ancient cultures, societies in which knowledge comes from divine revelation, an author, if you will, didn't value individual ownership of ideas and words, or words and ideas, as we do now in modern Western civilization. And so when I used to teach undergraduates, they used to say to me sometimes, well, Shakespeare stole all of his ideas. How come he didn't get accused of plagiarism? And there's a few answers to that, but perhaps the most important one is that in Shakespeare's time, no one cared about what we now refer to as intellectual property. The concept of intellectual property, this is from Oxford English Dictionary showing kind of where terms came from. We see that one in the middle that I've circled. One of the first real times that we use the idea of intellectual property, really referring to the ideas out of someone's brain, comes in about the mid-19th century, so in the US. So really, we didn't care much about the idea that you could own an idea until about 150, 160 years ago, right? Before that, you could own stuff, you owned your wheat, you owned your farm, but you didn't necessarily own ideas. And then we started to think about owning ideas. So things like plagiarism is directly connected to something like a patent, right? You came up with an idea, you invented something, you use it. That's the same. You wouldn't steal someone's patent the same way you shouldn't be stealing someone's words. So good citation is more than just not plagiarizing, right? So I think like not plagiarizing is the low bar. Good citation is good scholarship, and it's important to understand what good citation looks like. So good citation means you're always acknowledging the words or ideas that came from a source. You're doing that really to establish your own credibility as a knowledgeable scholar. And you're doing it also so that whoever's reading your work can kind of go trace back and say, okay, well, this is a really interesting idea. I want to know more about that. And they can go trace back and be part of that conversation as well. All right. So I'm going to get into the how, the nitty-gritty of how you actually do this. And again, please feel free to ask questions. So how do you cite? So we've already said a little bit about why you're citing, right? You're citing to communicate that you are in some kind of conversation with that source, right? So your reader expects to hear what you have to say in your paper. And while your reader may recognize that you're joining an academic conversation, they've really come to your paper to read your perspective. So even in a class assignment where your advisor with a professor has said, I want you to cite sources, they still want to know what you have done with those sources, right? They're not evaluating those sources. Those sources aren't going to get a grade for English 699. You're going to get a grade for English 699, right? So people coming to your text always want to see what you've done with your sources. So that's why it's important to really think about how you're pulling something in. So besides like the mechanics of how to include a citation, it's really important to think about, well, why am I referencing this other ideas? How is this other idea supporting what I want to say and my perspective in my paper? So when your reader sees a citation, it's an indication that your idea has a source, but the expectation is always that the words are your own. The words are your expression of that idea and never the direct words from a source, unless you use a direct quotation. And again, that's actually pretty rare, and we'll look at some examples. So one thing to think about is that when you're citing, you want to be pretty concise with that other source, right? You maybe are offering an honest paraphrase and always clearly indicating where it came from. But the point of a paper that you're writing is your ideas, right? So there should be a lot more effort about how is some idea that you're using, how are you building on it, how are you making new knowledge from that idea? So another way to think of that is don't expect the sources to do the work for you. You have to write that paper, and I know it's hard. So be sure that when you're including a source, it's clear to your reader what the source adds to your ideas, right? So how it's forwarding whatever you're doing in your paper. And then we can think about different ways to use a citation, and I've put a few different phrases here and we'll examine what these are. So we talk about citation, but there's actually a lot that goes into the specific how you might include a source. So we might have something called a gist, just you're referencing just the gist of an idea. So it's a very general idea, main claim of a point, again, in your own words. You might have something called a mention, which is really just saying the name of the source, referring to them very broadly, right? So Shakespeare said, that's a mention. So offering very general ideas, again, in your own words. Sometimes you have only a citation. So you really just, in the parentheses, in the in-text citation, you're just kind of referencing that very generally. I'll show you what that looks like. And then we have a paraphrase, which a paraphrase is reference to a very specific idea in the text, and it's in your own, words. I can take that typo there. And then direct quotations. And direct quotations are you've used the exact words from a source and put quotation marks around them. And again, used pretty rarely in many fields, and in other fields used, we'll see why it's used in some of my examples. So let's take a look at a few of these. Here's an example of a gist. So this is the example I showed you before. All of the ways that, that these references are made are really just kind of the general idea of each of these. So multiple mothering ideologies have been identified in the literature, right? So now that beginning of that sentence says, okay, as a writer, I'm saying these ideas came from somewhere in the research in this field, and then including intensive mothering. Well, that's the reference to Hayes. Competitive mothering, that's from Toronto. Combative mothering, that's from Moore and Abetz. And integrated motherhood, that's from Dow, right? So that's just the general gist of each of those articles. So I know, okay, Hayes's article is generally about intensive mothering. So that's gist. Mention, here's a mention, you're actually kind of saying the name of the scholar or the source in your sentence. So here's mentions Stone and Williams, each provided a nuanced analysis of how dominant cultural and structural forces in the workplace are in tension with those in the family, often favoring male workers and constraining women's choices. And then at the end there, we get just citation. So a mention, and then this last one is just a citation, right? Generally to those ideas. So we've already kind of highlighted that one. Then citation only. I won't read you this whole paragraph, but we can see here this is a slightly different style of reference, right? These are for superscripts, right? And here we say these are all just citations. If we read the sentences, so we can read like the first sentence there. Children are exposed prenatally and in early childhood to multiple environmental stressors that can adversely affect their cognitive abilities, academic performance, and consequent educational trajectories, adult health, wealth, and social status. So this is, we're just generally referring those ideas. You can find more about those ideas in these sources. Oops, there, sorry, there was 5 of them. And if we were to pull them up, we'd see, sorry, I meant to show you that, like that's hyperlinked, we'd see, right? This is, the ideas came from each of these places, right? And then a paraphrase, which in some ways is hard, and we'll practice a little bit of paraphrase, I think, if we have time. So here's an example of scholars that have used paraphrase. So these are, Kim Griffin is a professor in the education department, so this is a passage that she wrote with a colleague, and this is their sentence. Ackerman, DeRamio, and Garza Mitchell found that student veterans listed starting college as the most difficult transition out of the military they experienced. Yet, according to Cook and Kim, only 22% of schools provided veteran-specific transition support. So in one sentence, these authors, Griffin and Gilbert, have made 2 references, and they're paraphrasing this information. So for this first one, the reference to Ackerman, DeRamio, and Garza, here's what the original looked like. This is the original idea from Ackerman, DeRamio, and Mitchell, right? The focus of our study was the transition that combat veterans make when they become college students. For many with whom we spoke, this was the most difficult. So there's a few things that we see, right? If we were to, for some reason I can't. But whoops, sorry. Oh shoot, what did I do? Stop sharing. Sorry. I was trying to get to the, oh, sorry. I was trying to get to the way I could draw on the screen, but I couldn't do it. So sorry about that. Okay, oops. So sorry, I was trying to, like I said, I was trying to draw on the screen, but I can't seem to do that. So, but you can see, right, that in the part that's in white, right, so this is the paraphrase. Yes, they use the phrase veterans, they use the word students, they use the word difficult, right? So the idea is clearly the same, but the words are also clearly different, right? For many, like in the yellow, we see for many with whom we spoke, this was the most difficult transition of all. And in white, you see, right, the difficult transition out of the military, most difficult transition out of the military they experienced, right? So it's definitely in their own words. And here's the other part, oops. Here's the other, right? So they've quoted very specifically a statistic, right? Only 22% of schools provided veteran-specific transition support. And here in the yellow is the original. Only 22% of institutions with programs and services for military personnel have developed an expedited re-enrollment process, et cetera, right? So we can see that especially the second one is much briefer than the original sentence that it came from. So those are very well done paraphrases. And then finally, direct quotations. So direct quotations tend to only happen in fields that use fields that are very text-based. So English uses a lot of direct quotation, history uses a lot of direct quotation, some fields of American studies, which is where this this example came from. Psyche Williams-Forson is a professor in American studies, and this is her book. And again, very rarely used in lots of other fields, but the reason you would use a direct quotation is because you want to preserve the very specific way that that something has been said. So in this example, there's the book, but in this example, we see that the author is referencing some interviews, and we see in the end here, right, she says, as Winston put it, quote, my mother paid, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a direct quotation. It's representing exactly what came from the original source. And the reason that it's being done, the reason that a direct quotation is acceptable here is that it makes sense to, when you're quoting someone's memories, which is what she's doing in this case, to get the words exactly right. So that's an example of a direct quotation. And you can see there's both a citation, this one uses Chicago style, so we see both footnote to the information in a few places, and then the quotations around the directly quoted words. And then one other one here too is another example. Again, this one from women's studies, another field that often uses direct quotations. And here we see this one's from a book rather than from a person, right? So here's again the idea though, by the time slavery was abolished in the late 19th century, quote, the goal of grooming the hair had morphed from an elaborate and symbolic design of African into an imitation of white styles adapted by Black kinks and curls. There existed neither public nor private forum where Black hair was celebrated. So to use that direct quotation, the reason that Thompson uses exactly the words of Bird and Tharps is that she wants to preserve the exact thing that they said. For whatever reason, she doesn't want to just summarize or paraphrase, that the exact words that they said are important to the way she's making her argument. So anytime that so one way to think about acceptable use is that you, a summary of something, a paraphrase, a direct quotation, the gist, the mention, etc., but all of it always with a citation. I have a few other examples, but I don't know if people have questions, if I should stop for questions first before we take a look at a few more examples. So should I run through the examples? Any votes for either one?
There's no questions in the chat right now, but if people have them, they can definitely put them in there.
Okay. All right, well, I'll go through a few more examples and then maybe we'll see some other questions. So here's an example. I'm gonna pull out a paragraph of from this article from the Harvard Business Review about barbecue because it's lunchtime. And we'll see how we could use it effectively, how we could make reference to it effectively. So here's the paragraph from that article, and the author's name is Rafi Muhammad there. It's a few years old now. Here's the paragraph. There are two key issues to consider before boosting prices during a period of strong demand. First, how confident are you that good times will last? Second, what initiatives should be taken today so if need be, price can be gracefully rolled back? For many businesses, it may make sense to forego a few extra dollars of momentary profit and instead follow what Aaron Franklin practices in both setting prices as well as smoking meat, go low and slow. So this is the final paragraph. The whole article was about this guy, Aaron Franklin, and why his barbecue is award-winning and the best in the business, but he doesn't price it as high as he might, right? There are other people in the Texas town where he's from that actually price their barbecue higher, even though his gets better reviews. So he cooks his meat low and slow, and he changes his prices rarely and slowly. So that's the paragraph. And then I have on these slides, so right under where it says Harvard Business Review, there's that paragraph again. And then I have some ways that that a writer has used a reference to this. And we want to see, is this okay or not, right? So here's one way to use this information. A 2015 article in the Harvard Business Review suggests that two considerations, namely confidence in pricing and how a price increase can be retracted later, are key to any decision to raise price in a time of high demand. And there's the in-text citation, Mohammed, 2015, that's APA style. So is that a fair use or not? Anybody wanna, I should have done like thumbs up, thumbs down. I don't know if I can see that on the, from anybody. Wanna...
All right, don't be shy. Someone just take a guess. Take a stab at it.
Good use, not good use? Oh, you're all too hesitant. It's not a test. I mean, it's a quiz, kind of. All right, so I'll give this one away. And then we'll, whoops, I'll try. There we go. So this one is not plagiarized. The specific words and terms are not directly lifted from the original paragraph, and there's a clear in-text citation, right? So we see that the ideas have really been preserved, but it's definitely not plagiarized. So this is good. It's fair use. It's cited well. This is completely okay and is absolutely not plagiarized. This is a good summary, and it uses the citation well. All right, so here's another one. Rafi Muhammad, 2015, a pricing strategy consultant argues that, quote, for many businesses, it may make sense to forego a few extra dollars of momentary profit, end quote, in favor of establishing and maintaining customer relations. Any guesses here, or should be a guess? Is this fair use, good citation, or not? Anybody want to try? Emboldened by seeing one example? Oh, so timid. All right, I know you were all saying, oh, sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say you had one thumbs up. So
I did, okay, good.
Go for it, yeah.
Go for it, yes, exactly, right. So this one again, not plagiarized. It acknowledges the source, right? We see in the first Rafi Muhammad, 2015, we even get a sense who he is, a pricing strategist, right? It's not plagiarized. It acknowledges the source, does use exact words, but puts them in quotation marks. So it's a properly used quotation, and it's still cited. All right. How about this one? This one's tricky. This is a trick question. Businesses should make pricing decisions thoughtfully. What about this one? Any ideas? Is this good citation, not good citation? Not plagiarized, maybe? Aaron, can I ask you why you say not plagiarized? Maybe?
Yes, sorry, I have some background noise.
No, that's fine.
But I was thinking not plagiarize because this could also just be like a statement that you're making. It's not something that's directly derived from this paragraph.
Great. Yes, exactly. So the reason I said that was a perfect answer. The reason I said this is kind of a tricky question is that probably this falls into that category of existing knowledge, right? You already knew this, right? Even I knew this. I'm not a business person. I'm like, businesses should probably make their pricing decisions thoughtfully. Yeah, that's probably true. That makes good sense, right? So it may just be common knowledge, right? In which case, common knowledge does not have to be cited. However, if you never heard this concept before, if this is new to you and you didn't learn this until you read this article by Rafi Muhammad, then this does need to be cited, right? So if this is new information for you, then you do need to acknowledge where you got it from. And another way to think of that, again, is to think about your credibility. So yes, maybe this is an idea that you already had, that you'd heard other places, but it may also be a good idea to say that, okay, not only do I think this, but this is, I can back this up with a reference to this article, right? So this is probably not plagiarized, right? It kind of depends. Did you already know this? If you already knew this, then it's not plagiarized. If you never thought about this before and you learned it from an article and you didn't indicate it because there's no reference here, then in fact it is plagiarized. So that's one way to think about that idea of common knowledge, right? And I see the comment in the chat. I mean, whether something adds to the discussion or not. I mean, that's I'm not sure what point you're trying to make there. Information that you're using. I mean, if it doesn't add to the discussion, then it shouldn't be in your paper. But if it's in your paper and it came from someplace.
I was going to say that this doesn't even add any information. So, I mean, this is a statement that lacks not only purpose, but also substance. So, since it doesn't really have any content to it, I would say it would be even impossible to cite this statement.
Well, so again, I'm not sure I completely agree. I mean, I think if it's not really saying anything, that it doesn't belong in your paper. I mean, so that's one thing to think about. But if it's an idea, again, that it's, I mean, it is a statement. I think you're saying it doesn't, it's not arguable, perhaps.
Yeah, like it's kind of like an empty statement. Like it doesn't have any meaning behind it. That's what I'm saying.
Fair enough. I mean, in fact, if you'd read the whole article, that's in fact, he is actually talking about the way that the decisions should be made thoughtfully. So again, I mean, again, that's about content and how you're using the information. All right, but certainly this idea of what's common knowledge often comes up, and that's the answer. If it's new to you, you need a citation, and if you really want to connect it to a specific source, then even common knowledge should be referenced. So it's a good summary, but certainly it lacks citation, so it may or may not be. Like a good barbecue chef, or like a good chef preparing tasty barbecue, a business should go low and slow when making decisions about setting prices. What about this one? So now you're hesitating because I gave you that tricky one. So I would say that this is, and I believe most of your professors would say, and probably turn it in, would say this is plagiarized. There's no acknowledgement of the source. So we don't really know whose words they are. And if we look at it again, right, this low and slow idea is especially, right, that phrase very much came out of the original, right? It's kind of that tagline, it's being used very particularly. And that this on the right in bigger type has no citation to it is saying to whoever's reading it, well, these are my words and my ideas. Right. And in fact, they're not my ideas. This idea very clearly came from the article in the Harvard Business Review. So this is plagiarized. The reader assumes that these words belong to whoever wrote the stuff in bigger type, which is not accurate, right? It's too close to the original. It uses the language too precisely. And it doesn't have a citation. And then how about this one? Most businesses should consider two questions when deciding prices. First, how confident are they that the good times will last? And second, what initiatives should be taken now so if need be, price can be gracefully rolled back? And hopefully by now you're realizing, oops, that one is definitely plagiarized. More than just a few words, right? The basically entire chunks of sentences are being taken. Even though there is a citation here, the fact that a lot of the words are exactly from, right, that kind of sequence of words. He's not just saying pricing. It's not just saying rolled back, right? But too much of the language is too close, so that actually those things should be in quotation marks, or they should be paraphrased more efficiently, right?
Well,
There's not.
There are no quotation marks here, but a colon is used. Does that help at all?
No, it doesn't. The colon doesn't indicate anything about where a source came from. A colon is just a way to structure a list in a sentence. So yeah, no, the colon doesn't indicate anything in this case.
Okay.
So yeah, so this one's definitely plagiarized. It's poorly paraphrased, right? Because it's all too close to the original, and it doesn't have even though it does have an accurate citation. And so that's my last example. And so just a quick few things to review. Sorry that every time shouldn't have shown up there. When do you cite? Every time you use a source, right? Sorry, something's missing from my slide I'm seeing. So when you have a direct quotation, when you have figures, data, statistics that you found in a source, so it's not just limited to a sentence, right? If you use data from someplace, you need a citation. If you're using ideas, theories, methodologies, any of that you got from a source needs to be cited. And again, remember that that good citation needs to be both an in-text reference and a reference list at your end. And again, if you have something in your text, make sure it's also at your reference list at the end. And if you have it at the reference list at the end, it should be clear in your text where you referenced that source. That's unless you've been told only to have a reference list, but ideas, there should be a connection between the ideas in the paper and your reference at the end. And that is all I have. So I'm going to stop sharing and we'll see if there's any other questions. I'm happy to answer questions about anything else.
You do have one question in the chat.
So I'm supposed to not quote from sources, but since I'm explaining a technology, I have to use some technical terms that may not be widely known from that source. How do I do it? So it's a great question. And I would say a few things, right? So technical terms that belong to your field, that are really part of the jargon of your field, don't necessarily need to be cited. Now you're saying, if you're saying, Farhad, that those technical terms only come from a certain source, is that the question?
So I've seen, I don't know, Farhad, if this is what you're asking, but it was
the terms are more like jargon.
Something related to what I was asking. I think something that I've run into in the past is students using these technical terms, which is fine, like you said, but I think the problem arises when the language is too close to the original article that they found the terms in. So then in a plagiarism checker, it's still going to come up as plagiarism because it's organized in the exact same way as maybe an article that was found online, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think there's two things to kind of think about there. And so if it's technical language from your discipline, obviously it came from somewhere, right? It has some origin, but you don't have to go back and trace that origin unless that's important to your paper to do. So to Farhad's question, I would say, unless the technical terms are so specific to a very small, to one or two articles, then if they belong to your field, if they're the technical language from your field, they shouldn't need citation. I think to build on what Tara is saying, I think one of the things that I see with students is that if the technical language is new, often you just don't really understand it yet. The first time you're writing a paper about it, it's still language that you're just getting familiar with. And so what I often see is students not just using, a two-word technical term, but they're also using all the language around it. or also using the explanation of it. And so one of the best ways to make sure that you're not plagiarizing when you do want to actually use concepts from papers is to, you can think of it two different things. One is make sure you can put it in your own words by looking at the description, you're reading the paper, reading the paragraph, putting it down, turning it over, shutting your screen off, whatever, and writing it in your own words without looking at it, right? Because unless you have a really amazing photographic memory, you're not going to remember the exact same structures. Sometimes I tell students to do that out loud, even like as you're reading something, turn on the recorder on your phone and say, okay, this paragraph is about blah, 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 blah. Right, and you can, and then listen back to it if you can see if a lot of the words are the same or not. But that's getting away from, so technical terms, the jargon of your field usually does not have to be referenced, but other things are. Are there sites to help with citation or gives rules to follow? Absolutely. Whatever. So the first piece of that is find out whatever citation style your advisor wants you to use. So if it's APA or MLA or IEEE, and there are both websites, most universities, our university has, our university library rather, has references. The organization itself will, so like IEEE, you can search IEEE's, you know, do a just Google search on IEEE.org and you'll find their reference, their explanation of their references. There's books about citation styles. And one other way to really be attentive to this is to, as you're reading things, to look at how citation is used in the articles that you're reading, and to develop an understanding of that. But yes, there's all sorts of sources for understanding the nuts and bolts of how sources are used. I have a question about common knowledge. Tara, did I answer your question about common knowledge?
Yes, and I think that this other question is sort of related about things that we just know in the field versus what actually needs to be.
Right, yeah, exactly. And then the question about, you need to explain to me what subliminal plagiarism is, because that's not a term I know. So what's subliminal plagiarism? I have no idea what that reference is.
Musicians being influenced by someone else's music, but not knowing that they've been influenced.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, they write a piece, they publish the piece, and then like they get sued for like copyright. It turns out they've been hearing this tune somewhere, and they had no idea that they've been hearing it.
Right.
They think that it's an inspiration, but it turns out it's actually like plagiarism.
Mm-hmm.
So you said something about photographic memory, but I don't know, like what if you get so convinced by someone's language that when you unknowingly try to write it without quotations, trying to rephrase it, you thought that you rephrased it, but turns out, you know, wording is the same or something like that.
Well, so one big difference is that in music, there's no reference list at the end, right? Musicians don't have to make those lists. So writing is very, sorry?
This person got sued for copyright.
Right. So that is right, and that's a completely legitimate case. But I think the parallel doesn't quite work when you're talking about using someone else's written language. So, because if you've read it somewhere, this is about keeping good notes. If you've read it somewhere, you should be keeping track of where you read it and be able to go back and reference it, right?
I see. So this is like avoidable by good notes, basically.
Yes. Most things in graduate school are avoidable by good note taking.
Got it. Thank you.
Other questions? Did I get all of them? Self-plagiarism, right? So let me say a little bit about self-plagiarism. And one is that self-plagiarism is actually much more rare than students are always concerned about it. So self-plagiarism is something really specific, and you could look at the description in the Code of Conduct. Self-plagiarism very specifically says you cannot get credit twice for work you've done once. I think graduate students, so you can't write a paper in English 699 and then in English 701 use 75% of that paper again and just build on it a little bit. You can, however, and in graduate school you do all the time, write a seminar paper, decide it's the topic for your master's thesis or your dissertation, and talk to your professors about, okay, I want to build on this idea, and you build on that idea. That's not self-plagiarism, that's further developing your idea. It's highly unlikely that you would actually use sentences from the, even if you did actually use exact sentences, that would still be your own work. And it wouldn't necessarily in that case be self-plagiarism, right? Because because it's accepted that you're building on that work. And I have somewhere a slide about like, even some of you will write what's referred to as stapled dissertations, where basically you publish multiple articles and then rework them in your dissertation, or just literally staple them in your dissertation. And there's a way to cite that situation. Even I have the slide. It's funny, I took that slide out of my presentation. But so self-plagiarism, I think, actually happens a little less frequently than people think. Professors all the time build on their own ideas. So it's really a matter of getting credit multiple times. So and then I think the question about referencing things from class discussion, there actually is a citation style for, depending on how, for class discussion, for lecture notes, things along those lines. So it depends, like if it's something your professor said and you want to refer to that, then there's actually a way to reference lecture notes in your citation. If it's a classmate said it and you want to build on it, there's a way to do that too. I mean, there's the style. I only know how to do it in MLA because that's what I use, but basically the style says, like, you provide the speaker's name, just like you was an author, and you label it as kind of informal conversation or something like that. Those nitty-gritty examples can be found, but definitely. And again, I think that's an interesting point, right? So with class discussion, obviously your professor expects you to build on whatever's been discussed in class. One reason, however, to reference things is to kind of make it clear and develop your credibility. How am I building on this? But also, well, largely that, right? To think about that credibility. So it's a kind of honesty that develops your credibility in a certain way, if that makes sense. Other questions? Did I get everything? I think I got everything in the chat, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I think you covered everything.
Okay, great. So I will also put my email in the chat just in case. I think it was on the first slide, but just it's easier to have it. I'm happy to answer questions about this. And then a lot of these situations are also things that you can definitely talk to your advisors about, right? To ask professors in your class, like, I just want to make sure I'm doing this accurately. Can I figure out how to do this? Would someone get in trouble if they've cited an idea 2 or more sources but had actually learned it from one and didn't remember from which source? Again, that's very much about good note taking. So I think if an idea, it comes from multiple places and you only cite one, that's not necessarily, I mean, that's kind of sloppy scholarship, which probably wouldn't lead to an accusation of plagiarism, but is still sloppy scholarship, right? So again, taking good notes when you're researching, making sure you're keeping track of where your sources, what sources you used, etc. So that's probably sloppier more than it's against the code of academic integrity, but still avoidable. Good sources to use, credibility. So that's a great question. I mean, typically you would be, usually your professors, when they're offering assignments, will give you some guidance about that. So I certainly, you're typically at the graduate level referencing peer-reviewed journals. The exception to that in some fields would be, it's often acceptable to reference websites, like company websites and things like that. I work with students, for instance, from telecommunications who often reference company websites. Typically, one good rule that I always used to use when I taught undergraduates was, if you can't figure out where it came from, then it's probably not a great source. So there should be an author or a clear company, right? So if you're looking at IBM's website, you may not see an author, but there's a clear corporate authorship there, right? So I think often in for education, for academic writing at this level, like if you see things from edu or .gov or .org websites, those are often a little more acceptable. Things from .com websites, right, that might be blogs and might not be sources that are particularly credible themselves, may not be the best to use, but that really depends on the kind of research you're doing. So that's a really good question to be asking your professor, what's going to count as a credible source here. And Debbie, I think we're out of time. So is that right?
We are. It's 12:31. All right. Well, Linda, thank you so much for coming back today. And your examples are so good at illustrating the different types of citation. I feel like I always learn something new about those nuances of writing. So thanks to you. Thank you to Tara for not only being a terrific advocate at Legal Aid, but for sharing some of your insights. We appreciate Student Legal Aid joining us today and allowing grad students to come in. And hopefully we never see you on the advocate side of our office. And everyone, take care, have a good week, and stay safe. Thank you. Thanks for coming.